this is Seema Chalani, your mentor from KYMS Academy, and I welcome you all once again to this platform of learning and knowledge. Previous year questions CAT 24 slot 2 series is going on, and today we are going to discuss last RC passage of slot 2. So let's get started and together we make it happen. Yet another anonymous quote: greatness doesn't arrive with noise, it builds in silence, one focus hour at a time. You need not go for any show or any validation, just keep working silently and eventually your result will speak louder than your words. So let's start with today's RC. Now, the tone of today's RC is cautionary and the author is full of warning because it's talking about the unintended consequences of the inventions that can be negative also and positive also. Okay, so basically author is giving us the warning regarding the unintended consequences of the industrial revolution that led to the climate change. So this passage is going to be very interesting, very easy to understand. I'm going to read the passage paragraph by paragraph and then we come down to the questions and with the options. The history of any major technological or industrial advance is inevitably shadowed by a less predictable history of unintended consequences and secondary effects, what economists sometimes call externalities. Any word which is given in inverted comma, not the entire sentence, but maybe a word or two words given in inverted commas, basically those are the question pockets, or there might be some option on that particular word. Sometimes those consequences are innocuous ones. Innocuous means harmless or even beneficial. Gutenberg invents the printing press and literacy rates rise, which causes a significant part of the reading public to require spectacles, which creates a surge of investment in lens making across Europe, which leads to the invention of the telescope and the microscope. So basically in this paragraph, the author is talking about the unintended consequences. Unintended consequences here, author mean to say secondary order effects or externalities of the inventions. And he is saying that a particular invention might lead to a chain reaction. Chain reaction here, I would say it's a butterfly effect. Now, what is butterfly effect? When one thing gives rise to another thing, and this is how the chain goes. So now in this paragraph, author has given the example of Gutenberg and he invented printing press. So what happened? When printing press was invented, it gave rise to the literacy rates. So when people started reading books, they felt the need for spectacles. So need for spectacles was felt, and this led to the boom of lens, which eventually led to the invention of the telescope and microscope. So this is how the chain reaction went on. Clear? Oftentimes the secondary effects seem to belong to an entirely different sphere of society. When Willis Carrier hit upon the idea of air conditioning, the technology was primarily intended for industrial use, ensuring cool, dry air for factories that require low humidity environments. But transition word is there. It touched off one of the largest migrations in the history of the United States, enabling the rise of metropolitan areas like Phoenix and Las Vegas that barely existed when Carrier first started tinkering with the idea in the early 1900s. So in the first line, author is basically saying that if any invention is taking place in one particular sphere, so we can see the unintended consequences in altogether a different domain. तो जहाँ पर एक्चुअली इन्वेंशन हुआ है उसका जो कॉन्सिक्वेंसेज है वो बहुत डिफरेंट डोमेन में देखा जा सकता है. So in this, the author has given the example of Willis Carrier. So when he came up with the invention of air conditioning, so it was primarily meant to be used for the industrial purpose in order to reduce the humidity. But then what happened? In the United States, there were two places, Phoenix and Las Vegas, which were actually very, very hot. It was actually very difficult for the people to live in those areas. But then thereafter, what happened? What was the unintended consequences of air conditioning? That people also started using ACs for the household purposes. अब क्योंकि because they started using AC for the household purposes, so obviously they can put the AC in the areas where it was actually very hot. तो जब फिनिक्स में और लेस वेदर से वहां पर एसी लगने लगे तो वहां पर क्या हो गया, देयर हैपेंड द माइग्रेशन ऑफ द people and it resulted into the rise of metropolitan areas. Clear? So basically we can say that the intended use of AC was meant to be used for industrial purpose, and what was the unintended consequences, that people started using AC for the household purposes as well. I hope this thing is clear. Sometimes the unintended consequence comes about when consumers use an invention in a surprising way. So here basically the author is trying to say that unintended consequences are basically the result of unconventional use of the inventions. So here a surprising way, here author means to say unconventional use. हमने सोचा भी नहीं था कि उसका यूज आगे जाकर क्या हो सकता है. Edison famously thought his phonograph, which is sometimes called the talking machine, would primarily be used to take dictation. So this phonograph was the invention of Edison, and it was meant for taking dictation. But then later, innovators discovered a much larger audience willing to pay for musical recordings made on descendants of Edison's original invention. In other cases, the original innovation comes into the world disguised as a plaything, the way the animatronic dolls of the mid 1700s inspired Jacquard to invent the first programmable loom and Charles Babbage to invent the first machine that fit the modern definition of a computer, setting the stage for the revolution in programmable technology that would transform the 21st century in countless ways. Now, here the author has talked about the invention of Edison, and the invention of Edison one phonograph, which was meant for taking dictation. But then what was the unintended consequence of that particular machine? That people started using phonograph for musical recordings. Okay, तो आपने देखा जिस पर्पस के लिए बना था उसका डिफरेंट पर्पस एब्सोल्युटली वहां पर आ चुका था, एंड पीपल स्टार्टेड using phonograph as musical recording or a playback equipment. Then next invention was of the animatronic dolls. अब animatronic dolls basically होती क्या थी? These were the automated dolls. अब automated dolls basically they started using animatronic dolls as programmable loom. Again, you can see this word is given in inverted commas, so there might be a possibility that there is a question on this, or this is given as one of the options. So again, इसका use कैसे किया गया? As a programmable loom. Programmable loom basically होता क्या है? It's a kind of textile machinery. Okay. And Charles Babbage to invent the first machine that fit the modern definition of a computer. और Charles Babbage ने उसका use कैसे किया? In order to invent the computer, और उसका result क्या रहा? As you can see, it's complete IT industry. Clear? So obviously something was invented for an intended purpose, but then it turned out to be used in a very different way, in an unconventional way. We live under the gathering storm of modern history's most momentous unintended consequence, carbon-based climate change. Now here in the first three paragraphs, author जो बात कर रहा था, he was talking about the unintended consequences of the inventions, and those were positive. Now this paragraph, the fourth one, has become actually very, very important, because now the author is talking about the broader impact, okay, broader impact of the unintended consequences of the inventions, and that is climate change. Imagine the vast sweep of inventors whose ideas started the industrial revolution, all the entrepreneurs and scientists and hobbyists who had a hand in bringing it about. Line up 1,000 of them and ask them all what they had been hoping to do with their work. Not one would say that their intent had been to deposit enough carbon in the atmosphere to create a greenhouse effect that trapped heat at the surface of the planet, and yet here we are. Now, in this paragraph, the author is saying that with the advent of industrial revolution, entrepreneurs were there, and they started manufacturing the things. Okay, they had big factories, industries, and they started manufacturing the things. Now what happened? जब वो manufacture कर रहे थे तो some release of waste products were there, and because of that thing carbon got trapped into the atmosphere, and then it led to the climate change. Okay, and that climate change had a lot of impact on the lives of the people. तो जब वो ये कर रहे थे, जब वो इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन लेके आ रहे थे, they had no inkling that there is going to be such huge negative impact on the environment because of the climate change. Okay, तो उनको थोड़ा सा आइडिया भी नहीं था इस बारे में. So again they started manufacturing something, but because of the waste material it led to the climate change, which is a huge negative thing. Ethyl leaded fuel and freon belong to the same general class of secondary effect. Innovations whose unintended consequences stem from some kind of waste byproduct that they emit. Now, here the author is saying that leaded fuel and freon, these are the examples of the unintended consequences, okay, of the inventions, and because of those things, the waste they were emitting, these things arose. But the potential health threats of ethyl unleaded fuel were visible in the 1920s, unlike, say, the long-term effects of atmospheric carbon built up in the early days of the Industrial Revolution. So, in this paragraph, what the author is trying to say is, one is unleaded fuel, and second is leaded fuel. And here you can see the word unlike. Now, see what happened. The effect of unleaded fuel could be immediately felt. Okay, so the effects of unleaded fuel was quite visible, but the effects of leaded fuel was not visible. Okay, it was not on the surface, nobody could see it, and therefore it kept erupting for decades. और जब वो होता गया तो ultimately it led to the climate change. But when people started getting to know the effects of unleaded fuel, okay, immediately they stopped using it. Clear? So basically इसके effects जल्दी नहीं दिखे थे, इसके effects बहुत जल्दी दिखे थे, तो obviously we could address this problem, but then because the effects of leaded fuel was not visible for quite a long time, people could not address that particular problem, and ultimately it led to the climate change that had absolutely negative consequences. Indeed, it is reasonable to see chlorofluorocarbons as a forerunner of the kind of threat we will most likely face in the coming decades, as it becomes increasingly possible for individuals or small groups to create new scientific advances through chemistry or biotechnology or material science, setting off unintended consequences that reverberate on a global scale. Now, here the author is being little cautionary, and he is warning us that whatever pollutants have taken place so far, which pollutants we are talking about, leaded fuel, freon and CFCs, तो ये पहले पास में भी हुए थे and they had negative consequences. Okay, अब author ये बोल रहा है basically these pollutants are also working as a forerunner. forerunner मतलब वो हमें indicate कर रहा है कि आने वाले टाइम पर भी इसके negative impacts हो सकते हैं. And why the author is saying this way? Because yet again there are so many scientists, those who are going to come up with new inventions, new scientific advancements, and definitely there are going to be some negative unintended consequences of those scientific advancements. And for that reason author is like warning us in a way that how to deal with such things, or maybe to be ready with all these consequences, क्योंकि तो पहले हुए थे तो वो अभी भी रहेंगे. So the tone of the last paragraph is warning. Author is like being cautionary over here, और वो हमको यहाँ पर क्या कर रहा है, warn कर रहा है. I hope the entire passage is clear. So passage again was easy to read. So I would say that all the 4 RCs of slot 2, they were moderate. They were not that easy, they were not that difficult, but those were moderate. So now as we've understood the passage, let us go to the questions and solve them. We can assume that the author would support all of the following views except. Yet again, except word is there. It means author would support 3 options and he would not support 1 option. It means we have to go for the false one. बेटा जैसा कि आपने देखा है in previous RC also we have seen that there had been so many questions on except. Okay, so when except word is there, always try to rephrase the question like three will be true and one will be false, or maybe three will be false and one will be true. So here we have to go for the false statement. और author किससे agree नहीं करेगा. It has become far easier for people today to bring out innovations with dire worldwide consequences than it was earlier. ओके तो डेफिनेटली इसको हम सपोर्ट कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि अभी भी बहुत ज़्यादा इनोवेशंस होंगे और वो डेफिनेटली कॉन्सिक्वेंसेज उसके अनइंटेंडेड कॉन्सिक्वेंसेज होंगे जितने पहले थे उससे कहीं ज़्यादा अभी भी हो सकते हैं, बिकॉज दिस वी हैव सीन इन दी लास्ट पैराग्राफ वेयर द ऑथर इज सेइंग दैट दीज थ्री थिंग्स आर वर्किंग एज forerunner. Which three things? Leaded fuel, freon and CFCs. So yes, this is something that author would support. So this is going to be true. The emissions caused by the large-scale use of leaded fuel ought to have been addressed earlier than they were. So as I told you earlier also, कि जो unleaded fuel थे उनके जो effects थे they were immediately apparent, but leaded fuel के effects they were not immediately apparent and it went on for decades. तो अगर पहले से पता होता तो definitely we could have addressed those effects also. So again this is something that the author is going to support. So again this is going to be true. While technological advances in the past have had innocuous or beneficial outcomes, more recent advances have the potential to be more threatening globally. So now in this option, two parts are given. So now we have to check both the parts, okay? And both the parts should be wrong or correct in order to reach to the answer. While technological advances in the past have had innocuous means harmless or beneficial outcomes, more recent advances have the potential to be more threatening globally. So if I talk about the second part is something author is going to support. But if I talk about the first part, obviously author is not going to support this thing. The reason is these advances have already taken place in the past. तो हमने यहाँ पर देखा था in the passage that there had been so many technological advancements, inventions, जहाँ पर positive भी outcomes थे उसके और negative भी थे. Example was climate change. So how can you say that in the past they have had only the innocuous or beneficial outcomes? No, they also had the negative outcomes. So yes, this is something author would not support. So this is going to be false. So in a way, I have got my answer, but then I would verify the last option as well. The byproducts of leaded fuel rather than the fuel itself were responsible for the buildup of carbon-related gases in the atmosphere. So in this option, the author is saying that not directly fuel, but the byproducts of leaded fuel. So हुआ क्या, जब leaded fuel था तो byproducts were there and obviously the carbon got trapped into the atmosphere. So yes, this is again something author is going to support. Okay, so not the fuel but the byproducts of leaded fuel, it led to the climate change. So again this is going to be true. So what's the answer? Answer is going to be 3. Clear? Question 2. Carrier, Babbage and Edison are mentioned in the passage to illustrate the author's point that now these names we came across in the third paragraph where the author talked about the phonograph, anometric dolls, okay, और किस तरह से उनके unintended consequences आ गए थे. So why the author has mentioned the name of these three inventors? These inventors could not have visualized the eventual impact of their inventions on society. So can we infer this thing? Because obviously in the paragraph the author has written that phonograph was intended to be used to take the dictation. But ultimately what happened? Phonograph was used as a musical recording equipment. So these inventors did not even think of this way. Okay, उनको लगता था कि okay, this can be the use of that particular thing. And whatever intended consequences were there, that completely depended on the unconventional use of those inventions. So they had no idea, they had no inkling about this thing. So this is the possible answer. So I'm going to keep it aside as of now because I'm going to verify all the three options. So this is something which is mentioned in the passage, it is going to be the answer. Now, the secondary effect of past inventions mostly resulted in the creation of new inventions. Now, as you can see, mostly word is given and mostly is an extreme word. So just because of this word, I can eliminate this thing. Okay. So yes, this cannot be my answer. Inventions typically end up being used for entirely different purposes than the intended ones. Now here again you can see the extreme word, okay, the high degree which this word is carrying. Typically you mean to say almost all the inventions? No, author has mentioned some of the inventions, but all the inventions, obviously we cannot arrive to this conclusion. So again this is wrong. Despite the original intention, the unintended consequences of their inventions were largely beneficial. How can you say that they were largely beneficial? Okay, कुछ कुछ वहां पर beneficial थे, कुछ harmful भी थे. For example, climate change. So obviously I cannot take this as my answer choice क्योंकि वो यहाँ पर बोल रहा है वो largely beneficial. तो obviously you cannot reach to this particular conclusion कि वो largely beneficial थे. They were innocuous, but they were largely beneficial. Obviously, that is something I cannot take into consideration. Therefore, answer is going to be 1. Question 3. Which of the following best conveys the main point of the first paragraph? Now you see, here we have to simply go back to the first paragraph and then verify the options. Okay, इसका मतलब यहाँ पर जो हमारा range of answering the question है, that is only the paragraph 1. It means you cannot go out of the range or out of the scope. The secondary effects of most major technological advances in the past, especially if they were unintended, have turned out to be beneficial. Now, can you see the extreme word over here? Most major technological advances. Now many students they end up picking this option as the right answer, but यहाँ पर आप देख सकते हो because author is asking us the question and the answer to that question is going to be only from the first paragraph, and the first paragraph author has talked about only one invention and that is of printing press. Okay, Gutenberg का उसने example दिया था, तो obviously on the basis of one single invention how can you come down to this conclusion most major technological advances? Indeed, it is not my answer. It cannot be the answer. The full impact of technological advances cannot be estimated in the short run as the ripple effects often extend far beyond the original intent. Now you see, impact of technological advances that is given. It cannot be estimated in the short run as the ripple effects are there. So here the word they have given is ripple effects and I gave you the term butterfly effect. So basically butterfly effect and ripple effect is one and the same thing. अब ripple effect होता क्या है? आपने कभी ना कभी ऐसा किया होगा that if you are sitting, okay, अगर आप मतलब river के वहाँ पर बैठे हुए हैं and if you are throwing any stone into the river, so that particular stone is giving rise to 2-3 different rounds of that particular water. Okay, so one reaction, second reaction, third reaction. So this is how the ripple effects work. So basically the same process goes with the butterfly effect also, when one reaction is giving rise to another reaction, and this is how the chain reaction is formed. So yes, we are also talking about the ripple effects over here, often extend far beyond the original intent. तो जो हमारा intended thing था उसके बिल्कुल अगेंस्ट जाकर हमारे unintended consequences आ रहे थे. So basically what was the main purpose of the printing press? It is to print, and it gave rise to the literacy days. Literacy days gave rise to the need for spectacles. Need for spectacles gave rise to the, I mean, or maybe it led to the boom for lens, and ultimately what happened? Telescope and microscope. It was a complete chain reaction. So this is something definitely I can infer. Now the entire impact of a technological advance should be evaluated by the boost its secondary effect gives, generating further technological advances. Now here the word is should be evaluated. Evaluated here you mean to say should be judged. So obviously author is not there to judge any invention or any inventor. So basically this word is going to make this option wrong. Nowhere in the passage we are talking about judging anything, and so is the case with option 4. Option 4 also says the same thing. Same thing here, I mean to say he has used the word judge. It is important to judge an invention not by its immediate outcomes but by the holistic impact of its secondary effects. So again, immediate outcome is okay, secondary effect is okay, but then here we are not judging any invention or any inventor, and for that reason again option 4 is going to be wrong and the correct answer is going to be 2. बेटा यहाँ पर आपने इस क्वेश्चन में यू मस्ट हैव ऑब्जर्व वन मोर थिंग दैट एज यू नो जो कैट है वो डेफिनेटली एक चीज का डेफिनेटली मास्टर है वर्ड ट्रैप्स को लेकर. ओके, इट मीन्स यू हैव टू हैव अ गुड कमांड ओवर योर वोकैबुलरी. इफ यू डू नॉट नो द मीनिंग ऑफ रिपल इफेक्ट्स सो माइट बी पॉसिबल कि आप उसको एज एन आंसर पिक नहीं करेंगे, बट इफ यू नो द मीनिंग ऑफ रिपल इफेक्ट्स इट इज गोइंग टू बी इजी फॉर यू to go for the right answer. So keep practicing vocab also. The last question is, the author lists all of the following examples as externalities of major technical advances, except, as I told you while reading the passage also, that if any word is given in inverted comma, so basically that is a question pocket or there can be an option. So you can see over here कि यहाँ पर भी एक question पूछा गया है externalities, और externalities कहाँ पर आया था in the first paragraph, and ultimately what is the another word of externalities? It is secondary order effects, unintended consequences. Extension of the phonograph to large scale recording of music. Yes, phonograph was basically meant to take the dictation, so this was the intended outcome, intended use. But then what was the unintended outcome? That it was being used for musical recording. So yes, this is the example of externality. And because except word is given, so we have to go for the false one. It means which is not an example of unintended consequence. Buildup of chlorofluorocarbons in the atmosphere. Yes, again this is the case of unintended consequences. और ये किस reason से होते हैं? Maybe because of the industrial revolution, or maybe because of the buildings or industries, factories. Okay, so yes, this is also an example of externality. So again I am going to eliminate this. Cooling and dehumidifying of factories through air conditioning. So this was clearly given in the paragraph that the main intended purpose of ACs was to decrease the humidity of factories. So that was the intended consequence. But then what was the unintended consequence? That people started using AC for the household purposes also. So yes, this was the intended use. This was not the externality. And because we have to go for the except question, so this is going to be false. My answer is going to be 3. Next, application of the Jekyll loom to modern IT programming. In the paragraph again, the author said that animatronic doll was there and that was actually meant for something else. But then what happened? People used that particular doll for programmable loom. So again, this was the unintended consequence. So this cannot be the answer. So this is true, this is true, this is true. These are the examples of unintended consequences, and this is the example of intended consequence. Therefore, third is going to be the answer. So I hope you liked today's RC and it was an interesting RC. I actually loved it. So I'm done with today's session. Take care, stay tuned with us. And any doubt, give us a call on this number and you can always visit our website. Thank you so much.